Century 1 AD. The eruption of Vesuvius buried Pompeii and Herculaneum under 6 meters of ash and pumice stone. Thousands died in minutes, trapped in postures of flight. The disaster was so sudden that bodies were fossilized in the positions of which death surprised them. Vesuvius threw a column of ash 33 kilometers high, releasing 1,500,000 tons of material per second and 100,000 times the energy of Hiroshima. The region remained uninhabitable for generations. The event was so impactful that the accounts of Pliny the Younger still terrify historians. The local economy collapsed and the Roman Empire lost 2 of its most prosperous cities. Century 2. In the year 165 AD, a plague, probably smallpox, emerged that killed between 5 and 10 million people. The disease reduced the Roman army and caused an economic crisis. Doctors of the time, like Galen, described symptoms never seen before. Trade stopped and the economy contracted. Soldiers returning from campaigns in the east brought the disease that devastated cities and villages. The outbreak paralyzed trade with India and Southeast Asia, generating social unrest and mass displacements. The empire was weakened against invasions and internal conflicts, accelerating the beginning of its decline. Century 3. The plague of Cyprian, which occurred in the year 251 AD, left up to 5,000 deaths daily in Rome. Alexandria lost more than half of its population due to the plague. The crisis aggravated political instability, with emperors murdered and usurpers in power. Persecution of Christians increased because they were blamed for the calamity. Famine and civil war spread. The disease, probably smallpox, measles, or hemorrhagic fever, devastated food production in the army. Emperor Decius ordered massive sacrifices to the gods, which generated religious persecutions. The empire experienced invasions, economic collapse, and a crisis that lasted decades. Century 4. In 365 AD, an earthquake in Crete generated a tsunami that swept through Alexandria, killing tens of thousands in hours. The sea penetrated kilometers inland, destroying crops and leaving thousands of people homeless. The disaster accelerated migrations and weakened key trade routes of the Roman Empire. The tsunami sank ships and wiped entire towns off the map. Survivors were left without food or drinking water, causing them to die slowly. Additionally, this century saw the beginning of violent migrations of the Huns that pushed tribes toward the Roman Empire, further destabilizing it and preparing the ground for its fall. Century 5. In the year 410 AD, the sack of Rome occurred. This happened because the Visigoths of Alaric sacked Rome, killing and enslaving thousands. The looting lasted 3 days. Temples and palaces were burned. The event caused waves of refugees and marked the beginning of the disintegration of Roman power in the West. Europe entered an era of uncertainty and violence. The sack psychologically impacted the entire ancient world, showing that Rome was no longer invulnerable. Additionally, the invasion of Attila the Hun in 451 AD devastated entire regions of Europe, adding more chaos and destruction to the continent. Century 6. The year 536 AD, known as the worst year in history, brought volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky for 18 months. Summer never arrived. Temperatures dropped by up to 2.5 degrees Celsius. There was snow in China in summer. Famine killed millions and millions of people. The plague of Justinian, years later, eliminated up to half the population of the Byzantine Empire. This caused trade to collapse and the economy to sink. Cities were abandoned and food shortages generated social unrest. Some historians consider this period as the beginning of the Dark Ages. Recovery took centuries and the impact was felt in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Century 6 continued. Yellow Plague devastated monasteries in Britannia and Ireland, affecting religious life. The death of Muhammad in 632 unleashed the Ridda Wars, fragmenting the Arabian Peninsula. Islam expanded after overcoming the crisis, but the violence left deep scars in the region. The plague destroyed centers of learning and monastic communities, altering the social structure. The civil wars after Muhammad's death redefined the political and religious map of the Middle East for decades. Century 7. The Abbasid Revolution of the year 750 AD. The Abbasid Revolution overthrew the Umayyad Caliphate after the Battle of the Zab. Almost the entire Umayyad family was executed. The change of dynasty brought civil wars, purges, and the transfer of the capital from Damascus to Baghdad. The Islamic world was plunged into chaos for decades and decades. The conflict unleashed rebellions in provinces and a crisis of legitimacy that lasted generations, which ended the lives of many people. The Abbasid rise transformed the culture, economy, and politics of the entire Islamic world. Century 9. In the year 865, the Great Viking Invasion occurred. The great heathen army led by the sons of Ragnar invaded England. Monasteries and cities were razed. Entire kingdoms collapsed.
Viking rule altered the culture, politics, and religion of the British Isles, and their legacy lasted for centuries. The invasion was one of the largest of the time, with campaigns of occupation and systematic destruction. Chaos and fear took hold of the population, and the Anglo-Saxon resistance barely managed to survive. The Vikings established the Danelaw, a region under their control, where they imposed new laws and customs. They also introduced innovations in navigation and trade, which transformed the local economy and facilitated cultural exchange between Scandinavia and the British Isles. Century 10 continued. The taking of Jerusalem occurred in the year 1099. The First Crusade culminated in the massacre of Jerusalem. Tens of thousands died. The city was sacked and temples profaned. The event fueled centuries of religious hatred and holy wars. Violence spread throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The siege of the city lasted weeks, and accounts described rivers of blood in the streets. The impact was so great that the region was never the same again. After the conquest, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was established, a crusader state that attracted knights and settlers from Europe. Castles and fortifications were built, and the presence of the Crusaders altered the political and commercial balance of the region, generating new alliances and conflicts. Century 11. The Aleppo earthquake, which occurred in the year 1338, killed more than 200,000 people and destroyed key trade routes. The Syrian economy collapsed. Entire cities were left in ruins. The disaster boosted the rise of Italian cities like Venice by diverting trade toward the western Mediterranean. Reconstruction was slow and costly, and the region lost its central role in trade for centuries. The social and economic trauma was profound. The earthquake also caused mass migrations and changes in population distribution. Survivors settled in new areas, which altered the ethnic and religious composition of the region and affected architecture with new anti-seismic techniques and reconstruction. Century 11 continued. In the year 1258, the sack of Baghdad was perpetrated. The Mongols razed Baghdad, killing hundreds of thousands and destroying its library. The Tigris River ran red with blood and ink. The end of the Abbasid Caliphate marked the cultural and scientific collapse of the Islamic world. It coincided with the global volcanic eruption that worsened famines. The city, epicenter of knowledge, lost irreplaceable manuscripts. The Islamic world entered a period of decline and fragmentation. The power vacuum allowed the rise of new regional empires like the Mamluks in Egypt. Additionally, the dispersion of scholars and artisans from Baghdad contributed to the transmission of knowledge to other regions, although cultural recovery was slow and partial. Century 14. In the year 1347, the Black Death killed a third of the European population. Globally, it is estimated that up to 200 million people died. Terror paralyzed cities and entire families disappeared. Many saw the plague as divine punishment, which led to penitential processions and persecutions against minorities, especially Jews, falsely accused of spreading the disease. The economy and social structure of Europe changed forever. The shortage of labor raised wages and weakened the feudal system, favoring social mobility and the rise of the bourgeoisie. The outbreak began in Crimea and spread through trade routes, affecting both cities and rural areas. The consumption of meat and dairy products increased as more resources became available for survivors, and depopulation led to the abandonment of land and the collapse of agricultural production. Successive waves of plague prevented demographic recovery for more than a century, and fear and insecurity generated social revolts and changes in the European collective mentality. Century 15. The fall of Constantinople in the year 1453 by the Ottomans ended 1,000 years of Byzantine history. Thousands of inhabitants died or were enslaved, and the city was sacked for days. The exodus of Byzantine intellectuals to the West fueled the Renaissance in Europe, bringing with them classical manuscripts and knowledge that enriched Western culture and science. World trade was reconfigured after the loss of traditional routes to Asia, forcing European powers to seek new routes, giving rise to the Age of Discovery. The fall caused refugee crisis and the migration of knowledge to Italy and other regions, accelerating the circulation of ideas and techniques. Additionally, the city was repopulated with diverse ethnic communities under the Ottoman rule, becoming the new imperial capital and center of Muslim power in the region. The Ottoman Empire emerged as a new power, altering the geopolitical and religious balance of Europe and the Middle East. Century 16. The arrival of smallpox in 1520 decimated up to 90% of the indigenous population in some regions of America. The social and demographic collapse allowed the rapid Spanish conquest of empires like the Aztec and Inca that were razed in a few years. The disease advanced faster than armies, disintegrating political and social structures before direct contact with the conquerors. The American continent changed forever. The disappearance of millions of people transformed demography and facilitated European colonization. The loss of leaders and workers destabilized agriculture and daily life, and the transmission of European diseases continued for centuries, causing new waves of mortality. The cultural trauma and the rupture of ancestral traditions left deep traces in the historical memory of America. and the arrival of new human groups and animals radically modified the ecosystem and ways of life. Century 16 continued. In the year 1644, the Ming dynasty fell after decades of internal rebellions and the Manchu invasion, causing the death of millions. The country suffered famines, epidemics, and widespread destruction during the transition to Qing power. This period coincided with the Little Ice Age, aggravating the agricultural and social disaster. Crops failed, and the population was reduced by tens of millions. The Civil War and foreign invasion destroyed cities and fields, and the Chinese economy took decades to recover. The arrival of the Qing meant a political and cultural transformation, but also a long period of adaptation and national reconstruction. Additionally, the fall of the Ming favored the advancement of new elites and the reconfiguration of internal and external trade routes, while border regions experienced migratory waves and ethnic conflicts that marked China's history in the following centuries.
Century 18, in the year 1783, the Chalisa famine killed 11 million in India, and the eruption of Laki in Iceland covered Europe with toxic gases, killing livestock and people. The global climate altered, causing food crises throughout the northern hemisphere. In Iceland, a quarter of the population died. The toxic smoke spread as far as Asia and Africa, altering monsoons and causing additional droughts and famines. The Laki eruption expelled millions of tons of sulfur dioxide and hydrogen fluoride, generating a Laki haze that darkened the sky for months. It devastated crops and contributed to social crises, even influencing the outbreak of the French Revolution. Century 19. The eruption of Tambora in 1815 caused the year without summer in 1816. Crops failed, there were famines and mass migrations. In Europe, people ate moss and sawdust to survive. The extreme climate inspired literary works like Frankenstein. Persistent cold and rain caused riots and looting in European cities. In China, floods destroyed crops, and in North America, record temperatures caused human and economic losses. Temperatures dropped by up to 3 degrees Celsius. It snowed in midsummer in unusual places, and food shortages drove migrations and social revolts in several countries, aggravating the global crisis. Century 20. The Holocaust was the genocide perpetrated by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1941 and 1945. During World War II, 6 million European Jews were murdered, along with millions of other victims such as Roma, people with disabilities, homosexuals, Soviet prisoners of war, and political opponents. The Nazis implemented the final solution, an extermination plan that included mass shootings, gas chambers, and concentration camps like Auschwitz, where thousands died daily from asphyxiation, hunger, or forced labor. The Holocaust destroyed entire communities, displaced millions, and left survivors without home or family, forcing many to immigrate and live in displaced persons camps after the war. The collective trauma led to the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Nuremberg trials. The economic and social consequences persisted. The disappearance of the Jewish middle class affected the development of entire regions, and the memory of the Holocaust marked global consciousness, underscoring the need to combat hatred and denialism. Century 21. In the year 2020, COVID-19 caused millions of deaths and a global economic crisis. Fires, hurricanes, and locust plagues aggravated the year. Lockdowns generated mental health crises and massive bankruptcies. Humanity faced a perfect storm of challenges. Additionally, the explosion in Beirut devastated the city, and digital disinformation complicated the global response. Social inequality and political polarization increased throughout the planet. Unemployment and poverty grew. In-person education was interrupted in more than 100 countries, and the social and mental health impacts were particularly severe among young people and vulnerable groups, with uneven recovery between regions and sectors.